So good evening. My name is Nama Clar, and I'm a CEO of Reut. It's a research center that is focusing on the connection between the Jewish people and Israel. We are working with the Reut Center. It's a personal coalition that works on the connection of the Jewish people and Israeli society. Very happy to participate in this partnership with the Ruderman Foundation. And thanks to them, we managed to make this evening into reality. Our objective this evening is to have an in-depth conversation that represents various parties of our future as the Jewish country of the whole people. It's not an easy conversation, but this is a conversation that not even one country has this luxury to avoid. And therefore, we invited various parties, the non-Jewish and non-Zionist parties as well, because it's so relevant for the discussion. Unfortunately, only two did not participate. They're also important for this. The door is always open for the dialogue and for the conversation in order to continue the joint work to reinforce the Jewish people. As far as I'm concerned, this event is already a success. We're not here on our own. We have so many various participants that care a lot about this topic, and they transmit this partisan panel. Among those organizations, we have the Ruderman Family Page and Ruderman Family, Hillel Israel, Meretz, JSNA, which is the Federation Organization of North America, Yesh Atid, Nemanei Torah V'Avodah, which is the forum of various communities, Panim Central, and the Jewish World Union. We have an amazing potential of almost 500,000 viewers in Israel and all over the world. In order to improve the discussion, we would like to implement few rules. Our objective is to have a very good discussion about the political and national strategy. We are translating that and accessing that into English and Hebrew. And the panel can be quoted and referred. I would like you to respect the time frame and get to the point, because we just try to introduce as much content into this evening as possible. I would like to invite Shira Ruderman. She is the CEO of the Ruderman Foundation. So good evening. I'm so happy and excited to be here with you this evening. I'm very happy for the very fact that we all gathered this evening and the panel. It already shows a very significant change in a discourse and understanding that the role of the State of Israel is actually bigger than we think as just the state of the Jewish people. The very fact of the discussion of the connection between the Jewish diaspora and the State of Israel and the presence of so many party representatives that are running for the Knesset is already a change in strategic thinking and strategic importance of this topic. And I'm very grateful for all the participants for actually recognizing such an importance. Before we'll delve into the world of content and this fascinating discussion, I would like to thank our partners, Reut Group, Coalition of the Jewish Nation, for leading and producing this very important discussion, for their everyday work, for this joint goal we all have. It's impossible not to thank Nurit Kaneti, our mediator of this evening, for her dedicated preoccupation with this field and the assistance and the constant help in the medium. I'm very grateful for you, the viewers and participants, for dedicating your time and joining us for this evening. And in the end, I would like to thank the foundation team for this amazing investment. Ruderman Foundation works in order to reinforce the connection between the Jewish community in the United States and Israel by exposing the Israeli public and the decision makers, in particular, to the Jewish American community and various needs, successes, challenges that this community is facing. The discussion tonight is just one of the horizons of our activity. There is no doubt that the next election day will gain tremendous attention. I'm absolutely sure that we'll hear important statements from various candidates for the Knesset. They will just move forward after the elections. We'll reach the Passover celebrations, which is definitely not occasional. There's such a discussion taking place before Pesach. Pesach is the most celebrated holiday of the Jewish world that designates the difference between ourselves and does unite us. This is exactly the narrative we are passing through generation to another generation. And now this is our turn the Jewish people in Israel and all over the world is not one block. We're heterogenic and we include various groups that sometimes is very different one from another. And now we need the strength to nurture the connection and unity in order to create diverse connections to work for the better future for the Jewish people all over the world. Regardless of the challenges of this hour, we're aware of the connection between the Jewish people over the world and in Israel. This is a significant, important topic since we are deeply committed to this topic. Toward the elections, the differences become sharper. At those moments, unity before the celebrations of Passover reminds us that union does not require unity, but it does require a tight connection, respect, understanding, learning and understanding of differences of others, and the discord that brings us all together. Ruderman Family will continue to work in order to increase the tight connection, to diverse the discord, and to create affinities and connections. I invite you to work together with us in order to learn, to bring closer, in order to march together towards the better joint future for all of us. I would like to thank you for this fruitful discussion in advance, and I hope Chag Pesach Kasher v'Sameach. So thank you, Shira, and immediately we'll discuss some, but let's start with the first warm-up question. This is for all the participants on Zoom. You can actually vote whether the issue of the connection between Israel and world Jewry is on the agenda of the Israeli voters. Indeed, somewhat on the agenda, slightly on the agenda, and not at all on the agenda. We have the survey also in English for the benefit of our viewers in English. I'll allow you a second to answer this question. For now, we'll just share with you that from various parties will receive their platforms in the field of reinforcement of the connection between the diaspora and Israel. And we'll share those documents of all of the platforms with all the participants here on Zoom and with various groups on Facebook that are participating in this broadcast. So I would like to invite our mediator, Nurit Kaneti. She's a journalist on Galei Tzahal. She's a partner of the podcast Am Israel Live, together with Tzvi Klein. And she will take it from here. Nurit, the stage is yours. So Nurit, if you can just open your microphone. So good evening, and thank you, Naaman, thank you, Shira, and thank you, Ruderman Foundation, Reut Institute, and the coalition for organizing this evening, and the honor you've been granted me to actually be the mediator, and thank you to all the organizations that are transmitting this meeting. Let's begin with this survey. You can actually see that the question is whether the connection between the diaspora and the Israeli voters is in our agenda, and the result definitely reflects the reason we all gathered here. 52% think it's a slightly on the agenda. It's very little in present. Not all, 36, somewhat on the agenda, only 9, and 3% think absolutely on the agenda. I really wonder who was this voter for him. Maybe this subject is indeed on the agenda. But again, majority of us think it's not on the agenda of Israeli voters, and that's why we actually invited the politicians in order to examine this topic, whether it's on their agenda. So let's present the participants in the panel that agreed to participate in this very important discussion this evening. I would like to present all of them according to the size of the parties, current size of the parties today. So good evening and shalom, and thank you for participating. Uzi Dayan, Parliament member from Likud, Minister. Hello, is Minister in the Ministry of Defense. Michael Biton from Kahol Lavan, Merav Ben-Ari from the Yesh Atid party, Parliament member Yulia Malinovsky from Israel Beitenu. Moshe Raz, he's a representative of Meretz. Rabbi Gilad Karev, he's a representative of Avodah, and Danny Dayan from Tikva Chadasha. So the round of the question, the first round of the question is based on the platforms of your parties, the way you presented to us, or the positions of the parties, the way, again, those of you that didn't have enough time to actually fill out your platform and inspired with the questions of the audience and your answers, I would like you to be very brief into 2 minutes. Unfortunately, I will have to ask you to stop if you will not comply with 2 minutes limitations. So let's be very brief, very honest. Let's get to the point at the very beginning. And an additional request is to open maybe, just close our cameras in order for the Facebook stream to be more effective. And let's open it only when we're actually speaking. Well, I will just correct you technically. Microphone is open only when you would like to talk, and the video stream can be open. So let's begin immediately. And the first question will be to Minister Michael Beaton from Kachol Lavan Party. I cannot unfortunately see you. Sir, Michael Beaton, are you with us? Well, so let's continue to the next question. It's quite symbolic, really, the disappearance of Kachol Lavan in this sense. Well, let's move forward to Yesh Atid Party, Merav Ben-Ari. Hi, good evening. Il Galdo, CEO of Gesher, and myself would like to know, how will you recruit the representatives of Orthodox institutes in order to recognize the jury of diaspora and to enforce the connection between Israel and diaspora? You can't force it, you can't enforce it. How will you actually engage them? And good evening, of course, and thank you to all the members of the panel, and thank you, Nurit, for participating. And it's indeed, again, it was an honor to be participating in this very important panel, though the outcome of the survey is really low, but not surprising in a way. I still think we need to focus on this topic because it's very important. Yesh Atid has a very detailed platform on this topic. I think that you make it more accessible so you can actually read in details how exactly Yesh Atid touches upon all the points that are relevant for this development of the connection and affinity between the diaspora Jewry and the state of Israel. When I was in the 20th parliament, this topic unfortunately deteriorated from the agenda, and now it's in a very uncomfortable position that is very dire and very complex, especially with the future of the next coalition that has to concern all of us. And I think that majority, maybe besides the members of Likud, are quite concerned with this future. But as a representative in the past of the Kulanu Party, I traveled to the US and I met, and in South America as well, I met people from various Jewish communities and I had many conversations again. Since you limited us very much, I can answer briefly to this question. The best way possible is to actually show you, to discover you, because myself, when I was part of the Kulanu Party, I came from a traditional home, and myself, let's leave aside the Orthodox and rabbis, I was never exposed to this world of the Reformic and conservative Jewry. So the first thing, as an answer to your question, I think we need to recognize and to learn and to try to coordinate our expectations, things that we don't know between the parliament members that are currently in all of the parties in the parliament and the Orthodox, of course, in order to expose them to this rich world of world Jewry. And I said that abroad, unfortunately, we have a lot of ignorance in this field, lack of understanding, lack of interest very often as well. It's very difficult to actually take the parliament members and to introduce them to those topics. And from my personal experience from the visiting Jewish communities and in Israel as well, we need to be very persistent to meet with the parliament members, to tell them and to talk to them while bringing closer the heart, kirub levavot. And I'm a very good friend of Ilan from Gesher, and we did that in the parliament. And he knows how important it is for me. And I'm always to his disposal and your disposal, I think, bringing closer the heart, and exposing this amazing world of Jewry in the diaspora is not present enough in our parliament and definitely not going to be important in the next Knesset. Hopefully, we will change the parliament and we'll implement the Yesh Atid platform related to diaspora. Well, thank you so much. And Merav Ben-Ari from Yesh Atid, Rabbi Gilad Karit from the Avodah. Majority of the Jews of the US, which is the second largest Jewish community after Israel, refer themselves as reformic and they have liberal positions towards Israel as well. Do you think that the Avodah Party will work in order to bring them to Israel as repatriation based on Zionist assumptions and also try to reinforce the liberal Jewry in Israel? And if not, how will you work in order to promote the idea of liberal and progressive Jewry in Israeli politics? So first of all, good evening to all of my friends, men and women, and of course, all the listeners, participants from Ruderman Foundation and the Minority Coalition. It's so great to be with you here from this position, and not on behalf of just of the civic community that is working on this topic, we are welcoming, again, as a party, Avodah Party, all the repatriants that arrived to Israel from any faction of Judaism. Actually, I think that 80% of the Jewish repatriants from the United States do define themselves as conservative or reformist. But liberal Jewry is not just a matter of diaspora. First of all, we believe that liberal Jewry, with the freedom of consciousness and pluralism in the Jewish religion, is necessary for our society. I'm a reforming rabbi, hopefully to be the first one in the parliament. I do believe with my whole heart that the reformic and conservative Jewry, secular Jewry as well, and thousands of others, various aspects are necessary, first of all, for the Israeli society. And we would like to promote the liberal Jewry in Israel while promoting the freedom of consciousness and religion, ending the monopoly of the chief rabbinical courts of various fields that do impact the Jewish identity in the state of Israel, supporting equally and fairly pluralistic Jewish identity here in Israel. We do believe that we're very happy to welcome all of the repatriants, men and women, but we also respect the Jewish life in every state overseas. We do believe in the obligation of the state of Israel and the state of the Jewish people to operate based on the reciprocal and mutual respect, recognizing all various factions of Jewry. Those words sound very beautiful, and they are important, of course, but in the end of the day, things are measured with legislation and budgets, first of all. And here I'm saying in advance, if you think you can heal this dramatic grief that Prime Minister Netanyahu created with the Jewry and diaspora using beautiful slogans while just commemorating this exclusion and discrimination of other factions and the Jewish peoples, have no idea, or they might be just selling illusions. In 20 seconds, how will you do that? You're telling us what you cannot do, but what you can do. You ask how to promote the liberal Jewry in Israel. And I insisted that liberal Jewry in Israel cannot be promoted by just bringing in repatriants from other countries in the world, but basically by ending the Orthodox monopoly on Jewry and Judaism in Israel, by supporting equally, creating non-Orthodox communities while recognizing on the governmental level of various factions in Jewry, creating a pluralistic platform, promoting them secular marriages, which will allow thousands of weddings that I held, while recognizing and ending the anti-Zionist regulations that question the Jewry of the repatriants from the former Soviet Union, while ending the discrimination of the pluralist Judaism here in the state of Israel. Thank you so much. And now we have back here the minister from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Michael Bitton. Okay, good evening, Nurit, Shira Namam. Uzadiyan, I did write down this very cynical comment because I did hear you. Unfortunately, I had a bit of a problem with the internet. So let's just talk about the Jewish people. Yeah, it was a bit of a Jewish humor, you know, that's it, just a Jewish humor. Yeah, we're usually friends, so it's okay. I'm not offended. You were the first one to be asked about this question, so I would like to go back to you. And I will skip him back to the question. And I would like to ask you, just inspired by Sarah Dobler, by Toronto Federation, and I'm asking again, how did your party, Kachol Lavan, promoted the connection between diaspora and Israel during your service in the government? How will you continue to promote that in the future? And I would like you to, can't give you the whole range. Please address in your answer the law of the nation that you didn't change or try to annul in your term. Do you think you need to introduce any changes into this law, and where? Well, so first of all, Kachol Lavan did ask for the diaspora portfolio and dedicated to that, a minister and a full-time with a lot of activity. And she has a whole report of her activities on the questions of education in the Jewish world, a campaign for solidarity with the Jewish world during the COVID period, and various activities for the benefit of the diasporas in the crisis, and other missions that she took upon herself. The law of the nation exists. Unfortunately, the equality clause that we wanted to introduce into this law, or a side of it that brings the principle of equality of any human being. The issue of the law of the nation is still prior to the international connection with the diaspora in the world. It's an internal question of the citizens in Israel, first and foremost. That is a person address it on an equal level. Any Jewish or Arabic person should receive an equal treatment. And Sarah's question, I think maybe it was following, maybe it was the second one for investment for the Jewish education in the world. No, that was the next one, really. So, okay, you know what? I would like to answer that at this stage already. I think that at this stage, I can tell you that for 20 years I'm working in the Jewish world. I worked in the Jewish agency and etc. And I represented Toronto Federation as well. And if we would like to address the question and the survey that Nurit just held before, we want Israeli leaders that address and speak to the diaspora. There needs a dedicated time and activity and a discourse. I dedicated a lot of time to Jewish communities all over the world. And at my part, I also hold meetings and Zoom conversations with the leadership of the Jewish communities all over the world. First of all, it's time and personal connection with those diaspora communities. And then it's a personal connection between Israelis and Jews all over the world. This is in-depth connection, educational one, encounters. Yeah, the differences might be questions about the Western world outline, what should have been removed from the table. Israel is still immature in order to separate between the state and religion. That it's a worthy cause, but we're still not ready to do that. And until then, we need to respect all the identities. And I agree with Rabbi Gilad that even prior to recognition of other factions as part of the Minister of Religion activity, we need to address questions of budgeting and activities. And we started those projects and we need to continue. Well, thank you so much, Minister Bitton. Another question to you, Mr. Uzi Dayan from Likud Party, Parliament member. The Jewish Agency is asking, you want to create a coalition with Orthodox parties. This has been mentioned constantly. To the recent years, their participation in the government is at least caused at least a neglect of the Western wall outline and the recognition of the reformic conversion to Judaism. And the Supreme Court had to be involved in that. There's so many non-Orthodox Jews in the world. How would you intend with this tight connection with the Orthodox parties to bring this non-Orthodox Jews to feel part of the Jewish nation? Do you think you will be legislation on non-Orthodox conversion in Israel? So first of all, good evening. Thank you for all the participants. And again, Shevet Achim Gam Yachad, we're all brothers as one tribe. And well, we're proud of our connection to the Orthodox parties, and we despise the hatred toward the Orthodox Jewry in Israel, which are very borderline inclined towards anti-Semitic tendencies. And it's quite a shame, really, that in this discourse, we do not ultra-Orthodox parties that are present. I think it's something that we're lacking here, since they are such a large and important party of the Israeli texture of our society. They were actually, we contacted them, but they refused to participate. Well, I assume still, but it's a shame they're not participating again. Well, they could have really. And unfortunately, I didn't hear. Yeah, you shouldn't really ride this wave. They should have participated, but they don't participate. And that's what Justice said. And it's great that they were invited. While trying to address, Shira, your question, I would like to talk about the cultural issue and the political issue. From the cultural perspective, again, I do support, and I think that Likud does represent understanding of Israel as being more Jewish and more democratic. And again, there is a whole discussion talking about that, whether there is a contradiction. I don't think we should segregate Jewry from the state. We can separate that a little bit in the politics. But again, what is more Jewish state? I would actually starting to teach, first of all, most of the Jewish ideas together with the democracy. What is more democratic? We have more than 80 parliament members that none of them today were not elected, or they were elected or appointed, and since then they are skipping between party to party. And during those elections, some of them already switching a third or fourth party with a little bundle of monies. And I think the party should be more democratic. political question. Well, we do have a bit of a question in this sense. The stronger Likud will be, the stronger this alliance will facilitate us to face those main challenges that Judaism is facing today in the modern times. And first of all, the status of women and conversion, Giyul. We will be stronger and will create a situation in which the Orthodox will have less of an ability to impose their understanding of those processes. So pardon me, it's eve of Pesach and it's eve of the elections, I know. More Likud will have more flexibility in the field of Jewish and democratic. So there's so many questions here following that, but from the other hand, unfortunately, very much limited in time. You never answered whether you plan a legislation concerning non-Orthodox conversions following Supreme Court. The answer is no. I think we also need to separate between two things. We do support a halacha giur, halacha conversion, which is guided by the Jewish religion. And I think we could have really avoided the very fact that the Supreme Court Supreme Court of Justice will be focusing on this topic. I think that the rabbinical court should be more flexible on this matter, or actually more friendly on this matter. Again, I did not support an involvement of opening up giur, but I think the discussion we're actually having should be more friendly. And this is a national challenge, and they should address it as a national challenge. Okay, thank you so much, Parliament Member Rosie Dayan. And the next question is to the representative of Tikva Hadasha, Dani Dayan. You are suggesting, in fact, a liberal right wing. As according to your opinion, Tikva Hadasha, there is a place of equality between the liberal fractions in the Israeli establishment. How do you see the status of those liberal fractions in comparison to Orthodox Jewry? Will you promote a civil marriage and legislation that will approve the conservative and reformic conversion? Well, this is quite challenging in 2 minutes, really. First of all, thank you, Nurit. I am supporting the liberal nationalism again. This is National Liberal Party that I represent here. And my personal commitment to the Jewish minority and the Jewish diaspora and the connection to any Jew, including all the factions in the diaspora. I did prove it, I think, with my actions and not just with words. And today one can actually talk about that. I had a lot of disputes with the Prime Minister on those questions. And as test case, I think I really did deliver and I did prove my intentions. And I think I'm a representative of the Tikva Hadasha. And I show my commitment to those topics. Can I talk a little bit louder? Because there is a bit of an echo that makes it harder to hear you. Well, let's do that now. Okay, anyway, after stating that, let's start with the marriage, civic marriage. We do suggest that to adults in the state of Israel, obviously, excluding cases of polygamy or relatives, minors, 2 adults in the state of Israel should be capable of institutionalizing their connection within the borders of the state of Israel without any need to travel to Cyprus or any Czech Republic or whatever. And again, I would like to emphasize 2 people. It includes obviously 2 people of the same gender, 2 men or women. It's important for me to emphasize that. So this is quite a significant change, I think. I don't really think, I'm quite surprised that the topic is coming up in this panel when we talk about the Jewry of the world, but this is mostly an internal Israeli matter that is touching former repatriants from the Soviet Union, etc., and people that for various reasons they cannot wed in Israel, and obviously the LGBT community. On the topic of Giyur and conversion to Judaism, we'll try to reach a consensus. This is our habit and intent. And I think I found a bit of a contradiction in the question of my lovely cousin Uzi, that they will not have a legislation, but in order to do what he is intending, we need a legislation. We'll try to reach a consensus. should be really clear. If the ultra-Orthodox parties will create hurdles to reach this consensus, then the verdict that will be granted by a Supreme Court will still remain valid and will become a law of the state, and will respect it and obviously accept that. In my eyes, I'm kind of concerned the relationship between the diaspora and Israel exceed the scope of the questions that you just presented here as a recognition of faction. Minister Biton just mentioned the Minister of Diaspora, Moran Kilevich, and when I returned to Israel after my term in New York, I met with her. Obviously, I agreed, and she asked me, "What will you do instead of me?" And I said that instead of her, I would definitely dedicate a significant and lion chunk of the budget of the diaspora in order to educate Israeli public. I think that the main problem that causes the rest of the problems that were mentioned is apathy and aloofness and lack of knowledge of Israeli public towards concerning the life of Jewry in the world. Just 1 second. So you have to finish. Menachem Begin said in the past, it was in 1948, the sea is not the border of our peoples. And unfortunately, I do feel that for many Israelis, the Mediterranean Sea, Chof Rishman, is the end of the Jewish people. And that's what we need to fix, really. And the relationship between ourselves and the diaspora will be solved. We need an access, we need care, we need knowledge and love, and it will be easier to find solutions of problems that now seems insolvable. One of the first stages of this love should be expressed with recruiting and engaging the political leadership, I think. And that's exactly why we all gathered here. Danny Dayan, thank you so much. And now let's talk to Israel Betain, the parliament member Yuli Marinovsky, in light of the campaign, quite aggressive one actually, towards the ultra-Orthodox and the Orthodox politics, and the light of the rivalry that exists between yourself and the ultra-Orthodox parties. I think we have to ask you, a significant percent of the Jews in diaspora are Orthodox and Haredim. Do you see them as an inseparable part, an accepted part of Israel? I have to say that the very question, but the very fact that you ask me such a question is already unfair. Obviously, you need to understand the difference. There is absolutely nothing against any group in Israel or in the diaspora. By the way, Orthodox community abroad works and pays taxes and complies with the laws of their own states. So I have quite a problem with the leadership of the Orthodox in Israel that in fact took their own public captive. It's not me. It's actually, in fact, way before. Danny Dayan and Uzi Dayan, other very well-educated people talked about that. It's so easy to control someone who is poor and dependent. And then, in fact, when you really instruct them, they do comply and then they vote properly. I want people, it doesn't matter whether they're Orthodox or the traditional or they are the million faces of Judaism, and someone decided here, the Israeli ultra-Orthodox politicians decided that they have a monopoly on the rabbinical court, on the kashrut, and they dictate us our lifestyle. They dictate us how Shabbat will look. They do not compromise the conversion. The ordeal continues for so many years before the Orthodox. They're changing the face from the Jewish and democratic into something completely different. So my problem is that I want Orthodox children, traditional children, secular children to study in school, to study core studies, STEM, to have the future. You don't have any Jewish mother that wants their kids to be poor, miserable, independent, looking for handouts and panhandling. And that's what is happening here. And this group is growing. If we look statistically at the demographics, and demographic cannot be argued with, the numbers are very clear when we look at the tax paying of the secular family and the Orthodox family and the number of children in those families. It's really very clear that very soon, without question, who will be paying for that? Will we be able to remain with the same level of education, of health and welfare that we still have? Because you can't really have an endless amount of money. And if the Orthodox parties think that they really received basically some kind of insanity, and they feel that they are drunk with power, they're getting everything they want because the regime of the prime minister dependent upon them. If anyone thinks, even for 1 second, that we can't continue and to introduce all those changes on Saturday, marriage, and other questions of religion in the state, while having Orthodox parties in the coalition, those people are delusional and they're lying to themselves. We tried. And for example, the recruitment and the conscription into the military, that was a topic of our 20th parliament. We tried to reach all the compromises and understandings. By the way, the GU also had quite an outline and we didn't like it, but we were willing to accept that. In the end, it ended with the very fact that Prime Minister ignored that and never brought it up for a discussion. I'll be done. We pointed out a painful, it's like a Rubicon. Whether we'll cross it and they'll have a coalition with Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, Litzman and Deary, and they will be running the state, or we'll just get to the pivotal point and we'll go back to normality that will respect, from the other hand, facilitate and allow life and progress of the state. So thank you so much, Yulia Malinovsky from Israel Beitenu, and now we'll go get to the representative of Meretz, Moshe Raz. You are a party that etched on your banner democracy, and we know that. We all can definitely quote your understanding of this particular position, but democracy and Judaism. I want to know, what does it mean for you, the Jewish pillar of this equation? What does it mean that Israel is a national home of the Jewish people? How does it look in your eyes? Well, first of all, it looks again the way it's today, but part of it should be much better. The law of return cannot, well, it can obviously, but it should not be changed. Israel should remain the center of the Jewish people today. Majority of the Jewish people probably does not still live in Israel. We're close to this point, but this is again a very important watermark. Israel is very Jewish. Saturday stands out even at the center of Tel Aviv, even in kibbutz, even the shopping centers that are open. Saturday is still very prominent. The Jewish holidays are very prominent. The Hebrew language is very prominent in Israel. But I think that Judaism has additional values. I support my Jewish minority. My children should know that they have cousins in America in the sense of the national belonging. And I completely agree with some of the speakers prior to me that said from the Israeli public it doesn't exist. When we talk about joint values of the Jewish people, I agree with Uzi Dayan that said that Israel should be more Jewish and more democratic. Should be more Jewish in the sense of after לרעתך כמוך, love the neighbor, תיקון עולם. Obviously, in Abraham that said compromise of disputes, it should be more democratic, of course, and it should be more democratic and Jewish in the sense of the state of Israel promoting equality of rights on a social and political level among all of its citizens, regardless gender, religion, and nationality. All the factions that are represented here voted against it besides Avodah and Meretz. It should be more democratic to develop it for the benefit of all of its citizens and residents. State of Israel should be based on the foundations of justice and equality and the vision of the prophets of Israel, which is also democratic and Jewish. This is how the state should look. The situation today, when we are from one hand, the Orthodox faction is ruling the state, you shouldn't really add any words. It's not just infringing Israel, but infringing the most of the Jewish world. But it's not the only thing where the Jews in Israel here from majority of the diaspora, we have a mentality of majority. But there was always less liberal and tolerant mentality, while the Jewish diaspora and all the rest of the countries have this mentality of minority, since they are minority, more humanistic, more liberal, and more respectful and inclusive mentality. Look at the conflicts we had in the United States. While the majority of the jury of the US vote for one party, our government is supporting a different party, the other party. Look at the responses of Jews all over the world to the policy we had here while supporting to expel the asylum seekers and our lack of consent on the territories and the situation there. If we're a Jewish state, we need to take into account other voices. They can't vote here. And I do not suggest they will. But let's stick to Jewish values I suggested and democratic values I brought up. And let's listen to our brothers abroad. Well, thank you so much, Moshe. We finished with the first round of questions. And another round will be followed by the survey we'll be bringing up to the screen, and you will answer it. Do you think that non-Orthodox factions in Israel will be addressed in the end of the day, remain unsolved for many years, or eventually will create a divide and disconnect between Israel and the world Jewry? Respond. Let's wait just a bit. And for now, we'll tell you that the second round of questions will include the questions that were phrased following the inspiration of the questions created by the parties who came from the field, the people that are active in the field of minorities or been registered to participate in this panel and to listen to it and took interest. The outcome of the survey, 74% think that will remain unsolved for many years. 74% future leaders, this is your challenge. Only 6% think it will be resolved eventually, and 90%, and there's a lot, fifth of them participants in the survey think it will create a disconnect between the Jewry of the world and Israel. And we should see that as a red light in the warning, really, if you're connected to the unsolved group that might really promote us to the disconnect. So I think it's quite a warning sign to all of you, those who are in charge of those topics, candidates of the parties. So now let's start the second round of the questions. And those questions, as I said, we phrased following the inspiration of the questions from your rivals from other parties, and I will mention that, or by the participants of this panel, people that came from the field, including myself. And the first of the questions will be from Yulia Manilovsky from Israel Beitenu. My party voted supporting the law of the nation, including the diaspora clauses. Are you still supporting that? And especially supporting the diaspora chapter. If not, will you change anything in the law of the nation? Okay, I have to mention that all the representatives of this panel, I'm the only one probably that repatriated. After 23 years, no, you're not the only one, Julia, myself as well. You're also repatriant, a new repatriant, a new, really fresh one. Well, but repatriant is repatriant forever. So that's why the whole topic of diaspora is in my blood. And during the previous survey, the only one that voted certainly was myself. It's super important for us because we felt that and we're familiar with that on our flesh and blood, which is really interesting that I paid attention that every time ourselves Israelis abroad, we're always taking interest in Jewish life there in this particular place we're visiting, really looking for the Beit Chabad or some kind of connection. It doesn't touch us when we are here, but when we're abroad, we're constantly looking for this connection. And God forbid if something is happening, what do? We're looking for the Jewish community and those who will help us. This is some kind of a hypocrisy, I would say, of ours. Concerning a question, well, the law of the nation, again, I will never forget the conversation I had with the parliament member Smotrich. And this is a real story. We sat down in the parliament. It was a night of ratification and voting for the law of the nation. And I talked to the parliament member Smotrich and I said, listen, if my mother is a Jew and my father is a non-Jewish person, so according to the law of the nation, this is my country. He said, yes. But I said, okay, but it happens and it's okay. And they are so many things in life that happens. And if The mother is not Jewish and the father is Jewish. Is it my country? He said, no, this is not yours. And I cannot forget this conversation. Really, it's painful for me. I'm very much sorry that we voted according to the coalitional discipline. Yeah, coalitional discipline. It was very hurtful for our Druze brothers. I remember the outcry and the pain they showed, and we see that to what extent it's actually not good. And if you're anti-Zionist and you burn a flag and you never join the military, you never pay the taxes, but you're Jewish and that's it, and this is his country. But the Druze person who is actually battling for our state in the battlefield and find himself in a grave, it's not his country. I can't live with peace with that. I think we should cancel and annul the law because it's never contributed. It just caused damage. And what we said from the very beginning, I'm so sorry, I'm a little bit under the weather, but the minority law, yeah. As we said from the very beginning, and it's a shame it didn't happen, we should have really taken from the Declaration of Independence all the words that are so important, and we should have made it as a basic law, which is a consensus, well known, and in my eyes, the law of the nation, the way it's been legislated on the topic of Jewish diaspora, does not represent reality. And another matter which really bothers me and burns my heart, diaspora, during COVID, when they closed down the Ben Gurion, we all saw what happened there. They stopped the repatriation. During wars, they never stopped repatriation. And there were missiles, people still come to Israel. I did. And well, partially, not all of the repatriation was stopped. Yeah, that's true. Only owners of El Al, yeah, he repatriated, that's true. He was allowed to enter Israel, but people were stuck with their luggage in the airports all over the world. And I was swarmed by those appeals. They were not allowed. They sold everything. They were sitting down. They closed down their businesses. I heard stories that broke my heart. So one cannot really talk about the connection with Jewry of the world. It's not just the United States. It's not just France. And we do love, and of course, it's very convenient for us. There's so many other countries in the world, and we shouldn't disregard that. We need to update the history, and we need to look at the roots of Judaism and fractions and etc. And we need to understand where the historical processes of the Jewry of the world occurred and what they went through during this period of time. And we need to understand last sentence. We are already, for 72 years, we're a state, we're not the diaspora. And those patterns of behavior that are so galut, I still see that among the ultra-Orthodox and some of the politicians as well. This is something that shows weakness. We need to understand that we have strength and power, and we can actually allow ourselves to be strong. Thank you so much. Thank you, Parliament Member Yulia Malinowski from Israel Beiten, and I wish you health. From one repatriant to another one, Danny Dayan from Tikva Hadasha, and the question to you is from Moshe Topaz. He's a representative of Yesh Atid. You probably know him, and whether you and your Tikva Hadasha party will support the reinstallment of the Western Wall outline that will allow other factions of Jewry to pray the way they want, according to their beliefs. Yes, I think that the Western Wall outline was a horrible mistake of Netanyahu government, and I can tell you that he did that prior when the Western Wall agreement was frozen and received instructions from the Prime Minister to impose the guilt upon the reformic movement, and I refused to do that because of a very simple reason, because it was not true. And I was willing to, it almost happened, I was willing to pay the price with my continuation of my terrorists in New York, though regardless of the very fact that I thought that I'm doing something very important there, but I said that my keys on the table all the time, and if you want me back, just take it with your hand and I will be back to Israel. But I cannot, this is my quiet conscience, to blame the reformic movement for them freeze of the Western Wall Agreement. After saying that, I would like to mention that the beauty of the Western Wall Agreement was quite abundant. From one hand, it provided all of the Jews an ability to unite with the Creator in the most sacred place, in the ways they find truthful to their faith. But nevertheless, it's also created a consensus that's been obtained under the consensus between the Reforming, conservative, and Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Jews, under the full knowledge of the chief rabbinical court in Israel. But the biggest miss in my eyes was that freezing this agreement was a painful mistake. It was an admittance of the very fact that this consensus has been broken. It's a rare consensus that's been obtained actually because of the very hard work of Avichai Mandelblit. And that's a huge miss. We will try, first of all, to reinstall this consensus. We will try to reinstall the consensus while knowing that we will be working together with Orthodox parties, whether they will be partners or not, but the government will be definitely not dependent on them. And we do hope that it will be something that will lead them to more reasonable standing. If it will not happen, it's very possible that on this topic as well, the committee will have to decide, and we don't know what will be the verdict, of course. Again, it's probably not going to be less than the current state of affairs. It won't be less than equal plaza for the people of Israel. From the very first day, we'll be reinstalling an ability of making more accessible the Western world to the people with handicaps, making it more equal and egalitarian. And of course, in the political context, as I said, yes, we will try, like we did in the past. Some thought that it's an impossible mission, and yet we managed to obtain the solution. We'll never give up in consensus on this topic, though if one of the parties will impose impossible requirements, we'll again find ourselves in the place where the Supreme Court will have to decide, or the government will have to decide according to their understanding. And their understanding, I can say that without any reservations, will include was the equal prayer, whoever wishes, in a respectful manner, with an access to the Western world and everything related to that. Okay. And again, with just a comment, the last comment, I will say that every time in the Western world, I'm visiting both of the parts of the plaza. Danny Dayan, thank you. And now we'll talk to Minav Ben-Ari, former parliament member from the Yesh Atid party. And the question to you is coming from the Likud party. It's been phrased by Hamid Alevi, parliament member, in the light of the equality clause that you would like to introduce into the law of the nations. How will you explain to the Arabic citizens why his cousin from Jordan is not entitled to receive the Israeli citizenship, while your Jewish cousin from Paris or New York is entitled? Oh, in other words, in your vision, what will remain between the affinity between the state of Israel and Jewish people in 2050? Well, it's lovely that Amit Halevi is the one who actually decided what will be the affinity of the Jewish people in 2050. Well, it's very simple in my eyes, really. Just as Yulia Marinovsky, I have to mention that. Honestly, I voted in support of the law of the nation. And as Yulia also then was in the Kulana party, I had reservations. And Reut Folkman and the party of the faction, we brought those reservations in front of Likud party and wanted to introduce into the law of the nation this very important law. Few mechanisms such as the legislation law and equality in the spirit of the Declaration of Independence. Obviously, it has not been ratified because the conduct of Likud for the law of the nation was, if you remember, Netanyahu was driving his car and telling about this law. That was the hottest topic in the parliament. Everything was pushed aside, and the only thing they wanted to do is to ratify the law of the nation. And just as Yulia did, we said, well, it's the most important thing for Netanyahu, Kachlon said, so it has to be 61% because it's a basic law. In many places I succeeded where I was not 100% sure to find a way. Here we all, joined the banner, but I still have to say something very important. One of the most important things we need to do in the next parliament is to amend the law of the nation and to introduce the question of equality, not to be concerned and afraid that it will actually infringe the Jewish nature of the Jewish state and democratic state in the spirit of the Declaration of Independence. We did not just write it, like I feel as a part of the spirit of the Declaration of Independence, as part of my existence all my life. We wanted to do the topic of equality. We can talk about equality of rights, and we can talk about equality of citizens, civilian equality. Yes, we can talk about how not to actually squash and suppress minorities, but to accept and understand the part of the population. And the majority's decision is not necessarily should be acceptable by the minority. We need to listen to minorities and to allow them to receive equal rights in this state. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. And definitely, unfortunately, will not happen, at least during this planned coalition in the future. So the way to change is actually to change the law of the nation, not to be afraid. Just know that if you give rights to the minorities, you're not overwriting the majority of the Jews here. And there is a way to maintain here the Jewish majority. And again, here I'm not concerned at all. I'm not worried, but I am worried for the next coalition, of course. But I'm not worried for the very fact that Yesh Atid will be in the parliament and will introduce equality into the law of the nation. That will never prevent the majority of the Jews in this state. It will just give the state this oxygen that we're lacking a little bit lately. The spirit of equality, the spirit of the Declaration of Independence has been actually, unfortunately, trumped in recent years, just like the parliament had been overrun, I think. In last year's majority of the budget that is here, we all want to change the law of the nation. So think again, think all of you, what does it mean about the state? What does it mean actually that from right and left, everyone understand that we need to change and amend and to create a real change, because the law of the nation is not good enough in my eyes. Again, the change will come. It really depends on what will be the next coalition, but the change will come and the majority, the Jewish majority, will remain. You said that everyone wants to change. I said majority. I didn't say everyone wants to change it. I said the majority. I'm not trying to be too pretentious. I said majority of people that I know want to change and amend. Mostly Yulia, people that work with me during the last Knesset, they all wanted to change. And I think Michael as well, because I think that Kachol Naval brought that in the very beginning, definitely Gilad Karid. I think majority wants to change the law of the nation. That's true. But the rest you can actually ask it that, well, the majority in this panel is not a majority in the majority. That's true. I said I was talking about this panel. Uzi, I'm not pretending to, talk about the majority of Likud. Majority of the participants of this panel, in reality, I do want to step into the issues for sure. Yes or no, Danny, do you want to change the law of the nation? Or you don't? Of course not. We don't want to change it. We think that one can introduce the clause of equality in a different law. But introducing the equality clause into law of the nation means equality of the national status of various groups. On an individual level of citizens, of course, we do support equality. Therefore, equality should be introduced into different laws, such as the law of them, human dignity and liberty. I agree. Well, then, Diane, thank you for clarification. Rabbi Ari, former parliament member from Yesh Atid, as for now. So, Rabbi Gilad Karid, representative of the Avodah Party. It's very easy to talk about liberal values, but if within that you do see hatred toward Jews and anti-Semitic tendency in Israel inside of it, as a problem do you intend to work against? And I'm asking you because sometimes the discourse on freedom of speech does not clarify exactly where the border is between the freedom of speech against Jews, against Israelis, and hatred towards the Jews that should be addressed. Do you intend to engage to combat that topic, and how? So first of all, I have to mention that this is a very sensitive panel as far as I'm concerned, because there are two topics that have been repeated here constantly: the Western Wall arrangement and the Giurim and the Supreme Court. I was managing the negotiations of the Western Wall, and I was also the attorney that claimed in the Supreme Court on the topic of the conversion. And I'm very happy, actually. In the end of the day, there is an understanding that equality of various factions of Judaism is not just a sufficient stipulation. There's so many things we need to take care of when we talk about diaspora in Israel. We have so many other topics to address, but there is a necessary stipulation. A state that does not respect other religious beliefs of millions of Jews cannot, in the end of the day, to promote a dialogue with them that will be fruitful. So this is a preliminary stipulation: equality of all the factions, freedom of consciousness, and religion in the state of Israel, and mutual respect. And then we could talk about other aspects concerning the anti-Semitic issue. Obviously, this is a mission, national mission of the Jewish people, and within this mission, the State of Israel plays a crucial material role, reinforcing the communities and diasporas that are handling and dealing with anti-Semitism. Obviously, benefiting from the diplomatic status of the State of Israel in order to shed the light of other governments upon the need of addressing this topic. This is obviously a trivial matter. Unfortunately for me, the treatment of anti-Semitism is insufficient all over the world and has been benefited and used and abused for political needs. So this panel cannot be neutral. We can't talk about motherhood and apple pie. We are on the eve of the elections, but we do have a prime minister that forges political global alliances with people that deeply think in anti-Semitic lingo. Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, or backing up a racist and extremist position of President of Brazil. Silence when we saw the anti-Semitic neo-Nazi march in Charlottesville, and the lack of willingness to actually straighten your gaze upon the connection between the Trump administration and the extreme right. This is a despicable behavior of the Netanyahu government. The embarrassing tweets of the prime minister on the topic of Rush Limbaugh's death was indication of the very fact that the current prime minister, just exactly when it happened with the Western Wall Agreement, prefers political interests that are narrow and alliances with the extremist forces all over the world in comparison to the interests of the Jewish people. The Avodah Party knows how to look into the eyes of anti-Semitism at the radical left all over the world and to respond. For example, we stopped our connections with the British Labour Party, headed by Jeremy Corbyn, and we also required a necessary response of Labour parties all over the world. And with the same breath, we can also state clearly the government of Israel cannot nurture close relations with those leaders of the world that under their protectorate there is a surge and rise of anti-Semitism. It's a very long list, by the way. I just have to say another word. I heard that Uzi Dayan talked about the harsh language against the ultra-Orthodox during the last week. We never believed in the discourse of hatred, but Uzi, come on, really. Personally, during the last half of month, a mountain attack of the personal incitement and threats of boycott and threats of campaigns where your partners actually compare our converted Jews and compare them to dogs. You think we talk about the hatred towards the Orthodox, and you cannot mention the campaign that compare Jews to dogs that are actually running here an incitement campaign while they're carrying official positions as the chief rabbis. As a citizen of Israel, I'm paying their salaries, and they say that the reformists are worse than Holocaust denials. This incitement against millions of Jews grew under your silence of your prime minister during those years. So please give me a break. Look around, get some proportion after everything that happened here during the last month. Gilad, take responsibility. I do not support attacks upon you, and I'm willing to reprimand them, but it does not justify the party, the Avodah Party, Uzi, I'm sorry, the Avodah Party definitely denied any discourse of hatred toward the Jews. We do not legitimize. I received phones, threats, and etc. And my name, no, Prime Minister Netanyahu, that excluded the relationship with the diaspora of the world, never said anything against. Show me his expressions against the film that compares people that they converted through reformic Giyur to dogs. where he actually reprimanded that. Thank you, Parliament members. I would like to allow you to respond, but with a question. Uzi Dayan, do you think that you're here during this broadcast that is for the reference? What's your opinion on the film or the video clip that hurt so much the feelings of the reformists and Jews that are not Orthodox? Do you renounce the extremist film? Yes, certainly. Would like to add the sentence. Do you renounce? That was easy to say. He said, yes, definitely. Well, it's simple. Again, if you want to receive a little bit of benefits from that, well, there is no need to talk about that. It never will justify the way people talk about Orthodox Jews in Israel. And I have this feeling, a very bad feeling, that it creates some kind of situation among the young generation that there is a whole genre of hatred towards the Orthodox that does not justify any attack upon anyone else, non-Jewish people as well in this sense, of course. You definitely talked about the attacks on ultra-Orthodox, but you never mentioned the attacks upon the reformists. Just double my words and don't count down. That's okay, it's still there. So thank you, sir, and we'll be coming back to you, sir, for a question. Minister Michael Bitton from Kahol Lavan, a question to you. In your eyes, in the eyes of Kahol Lavan, Israel should invest money and resources in Jewish education abroad, and if so, do you think that one needs to invest only into Zionist education, so basically Orthodox education that is anti-Zionist, part of it, will not receive funding? Liberal Jewish education that would like to distance itself from political preoccupation with Israel will not get it? Or we should fund any assistance from Israel for Jewish education? Well, my answer is, of course, we should invest into Jewish education, of course, and this insight is a result of the responsibility. The Jewish people have 14 million Jews. You can all count it differently. 6 million in Israel, 6 million in North America. So it basically means that the responsibility and the gravity center for the future of those communities to work together and to focus on Jewish identity, the continuum of Jewish identity and the challenges that we're facing as a people, anti-Semitism, gaps, poverty, and so many other things, of course. The gaps are not just in Israel. Those insights are, of course, after 20 years of work in the Jewish people communities, 10%, like 10 years are dedicated to the Jewish Agency in Canada. And again, 10% or 20% of my time was dedicated to build partnerships with the Jewish people, not just partnerships. The Jewish people still invest here money. They invest here billions of billions. Jews love the state and they do so much good to the state, but Israel is strong. Israel is a growing economy and it can dedicate monies to the Jewish people and challenges we're facing, including the Jewish education. Each organization that would like to create partnership with the state of Israel, I'm sure it will be hard for them, really. It's a liberal organization, completely liberal, that don't want partnership with Israel, but they are Jewish organization or extreme left, they won't take this money. Same for the ultra-Orthodox of a certain faction that want any connection with us. But I do believe that we need to invest a lot into Jewish education. The state of Israel is already investing a lot into Jewish education. And Rabbi Kariv emphasized we have the birthright and Messiah and other programs, but the other programs, as a mere delegation from Maccabiah, Shimi, I look at the Jewish education, this encounter between the youngsters and Jewish youth in Israel and abroad. It's not an encounter on a bus, in hotels, just to look at the paysage. I love the programs where Israeli youngster stays in the house of a reforming child and he comes from Orthodox. I had kids that I hosted from Orthodox communities and reforming communities and conservative and reconstructionists and etc. We have in my own house those kids and those kids that meet Israeli youngsters and they build a WhatsApp group. And I just count how many thousands of meetings of that sort we can actually generate between youngsters as Jewish people and adults as well and leaders. The more we will meet in real time and the more Israeli leaders will dedicate of their time to the Jewish people, I think the more advanced we'll be. We'll face conflicts. The conversion and the Western world. And of course, we will look for consensus. For example, the agreement of the Western world, they're exactly the way to maintain a dispute, but with a deep connection, understanding of the challenges, yes, and Israel has to put their hand into our pocket for the benefit of the Jewish people after the Jewish people put their hands into their pocket for 70 years for us. We have the resilience, we have the strength to invest into Jewish people more than ever. Thank you, Minister Bitten from Kahol Lavan. And let's go back to you. Was it the Yan from the Likud? This is the question from Taylor Friedman. She's a member of the parliament from Kahol Lavan a few years ago. Prime Minister Netanyahu's husband quoted as he claimed in the close conversation that non-Orthodox Jews in Israel, in America, will disappear within one generation. Recently, we saw to what extent your connection with the evangelical community is tight. Do you give up the Jewish non-Orthodox diaspora? Will you invest effort into bringing them back closer to Judaism, or you give them up? And your strategy is basically to substitute their support with the support of evangelical groups. And this is also very much connected to your launch of political opinions that you share with the evangelicals. A bit of a similar question to what we opened up with, so I will take a different direction. It's not a question of Kahol Lavan, it's a question of Tehela Friedman, and I very much appreciate her. I said, it's an inspiration of Tehela. No, it's just Tehela Friedman's question. I know her, really. It's not the party's question, Kahol Lavan, they don't have any precise position on that. I will take it a bit further, really, and I will give you a direct answer in 2 minutes. 2048 in Israel will have 20 million citizens. Out of them, 15 million Jews. We don't know what will happen in Israel. We know what will happen here because in Israel you're a Jew. As a default, let's call it this way. If you're a Jew, you will not become Hottentot or Cherkessi. You remain Jew. And you can argue about that question. What exactly does Judaism mean? So Israel has to be the Jewish nation state and not just Jewish and democratic. It will not just be the state of the Jewish people. We'll have more Jews that are today in the world. How many Jews will remain in America? I don't know. I do not tell the Jews elsewhere. The army Zionists, I think they should repatriate to Israel, but I'm not forcing them to do that. Will I keep in touch with them? Of course, definitely. Especially because the very basic fact that, first of all, I'm a Jew and afterwards I'm Israeli. By the way, the other way around is also okay. I don't mind. I'm not attacking this point at any aspect. So we need to reinforce the connection with the Jewish communities in general, with all of them. And I can say that in parentheses that even the Israeli communities as well, because Israeli communities in the majority of the world are not part of the Jewish community in the world. And there is also the question that we need to handle. What kind of connection will we create with them? That's Tehila's question. I support education. They all, we all think we support education, but I support a Zionist education. I think we need to educate people on topics that connect us as people. And there are 3 topics. I will start with Israel in this sense. Obviously, there is a split and there is a problemacy, and there's almost this cultural war that exists in Israel, of course. It's not just the problem of the diaspora, of course, and the Jewish people. And there are 3 things we need to emphasize and highlight in this Jewish education. Judaism. I'm a pluralist. I'm not multicultural, of course, in this sense, but I'm a pluralist. And I think that the Judaism is culture. It's a supreme culture. As far as we're concerned, that's what connects all of us. And there's also a language, of course, and the motherland. And all of those things are very important. As someone who will neglect that thing, we will not be just the biggest community, but we will be just the only community of Jews in the world. And therefore, we need to support and we need to invest into the Jewish education, not just in Israel. And it should include components that were mentioned. If it's just Jewish communities that are non-Zionist, They are my brothers. They're part of the Jewish people, but we don't have to invest in their education. All right, fantastic. The parliament members of the from the Likud party. And the question to the representative Meretz, Moseraz, and this is to a client from a coalition question, and one of the generators of podcasts. How will you connect the Jewish Israeli left to connect to the diaspora? Create a coalition with the progressive diaspora in order to promote the policies in Israel. How will you and how would you do you intend, if it matters, how you vote in Tel Aviv, who is an atheist, to feel Jewish and to create this connection with the Jewish brothers all over the world? Thank you for this question. And I think that the last generation there was a bit of switch of various roles and positions. 96, journalist then, Daniel Ben Simon, he was a former parliament member later. He asked Shimon Peres who won. He said the Jews. Netanyahu and his supporters. Who lost? He said the Israelis. Peres and his supporters. Very gradually, it actually changes, I think, because the Jews, especially in the United States, and they're the biggest community outside of Israel, of course, because all the rest of the communities are not coming closer to the numbers in the US. They're so much closer to what we would define as Israelis, not all of them, of course, 70 or 80% of them, much closer to the definition of Israeli in our understanding, not just because of secularity, not just based on that, but because of the liberalism, yes. Their attitude toward the reformic and conservative factions in Judaism, that's true, but not just that. The LGBT, the status of women, refugee and asylum seekers, the Palestinian Arabic minority in Israel, that when we talk about the law of the nations, let's not forget about that. It has been ratified in Israel with the parliament, who is a big support. When we tried to introduce a clause of equality, they kicked it out, and we supported the law of equality, only Avodah and Meretz. And the joint list, everyone voted against equality the way it's been written in the Declaration of Independence. Maybe something did change and Israeli politics became so liberal, and never heard about that, but it still seems to be the state of affairs right now. So I do think that the secular Jews in Tel Aviv are closer to the Jews in New York than an average Jew in New York, of course, than a religious Jew from Bnei Brak. They're very close to a very certain type of Jews in New York. But how will you create this closeness and proximity? This is the question to all of our people. It cannot be just based on repatriation. Of course, if you want to repatriate to Israel, you're more than welcome. And of course, you will receive a welcoming support. But it has to be based on the creation of joint values. Values I mentioned before. I do not say any other way, of course. In the past, we did have catastrophe that solidified that as people when they prevented the Soviet Jewry of exiting the state. Anatoly Sharansky was imprisoned. So, and he recruited the Jews in Israel, everyone, religious and secular, ultra-Orthodox and etc., left and right, demanded and the rights of our brothers. But in fact, luckily for us, there is no institutionalized anti-Semitism in the world. Doesn't mean that there is no anti-Semitism, but it's not an institutionalized. Of course, in some countries such as Hungary, there are those tendencies, but there are very few Jews, so it's not that of a great of an impact. But we do have to find other ways of uniting ourselves following this battle, this joint battle against this hatred towards us, that luckily for us is less prominent in the world, and it's definitely less and less present, luckily for us. So here I want to respond to Gilad, the very fact that our prime minister supports leaders that might be not anti-Semitic, but their supporters are definitely are, or they are very quiet facing anti-Semitism, or they have this campaign against SARS. Just the campaign is anti-Semitic, not himself. Yeah, I don't want to get into it. It makes it much harder to create this connection with the Jewish people. So thank you, and thank you all for your answers, very detailed one, and your attention. Do not leave because we still have an additional survey. This is the third one this time, and will immediately appear on the screen. And this survey is dedicated to the topic that had been brought up during the last parliament. It created quite a turmoil, really. What is the most effective way for the government of Israel and the world Jewry to directly consult or to create some kind of communication? This is a survey that takes as a given, of course, the very fact that there is a mandatory need or duty of some kind of mechanism that will create such an ability to consult. Is it a part of the legislation processes of members of parliament? Is it just a Jewish agency, Minister of Diaspora, Minister of Foreign Affairs? Oh, one should not create such a direct communication. Please vote. No, I'll just give you a few more seconds to vote. You should have had an answer. I have no clue. So no direct communication should not. I actually think that what I do not have, Minister of Absorption and Repatriation, it shouldn't be a separate minister, of course. Well, this is for the next panel, I guess. Look, it's that. What will the most efficient way to actually consult directly between the world Jewry? No one said that you should not allow such a direct consultation, which is already quite a happy outcome and something that does comply with the purposes of those who work on that. So majority of those that were asked, 57% think we need to have it as a part of legislation process by members of parliament. 29 think it should be done through the Minister of Diaspora, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and 14% think that the Jewish agency is a proper channel for that. Well, just a comment, Michael Beitan, I know, because we need to wrap it up. I just want to thank you, Ruderman, Reut, and yourself, Nurit. But this is the word of thank you. It's also calling for those organizations that etched on the banner to maintain the discourse and the dialogue with the Jewry of the world, because they are moving us and igniting those meetings in the parliament, which is great for us. So I would like to take a second, and I do want to thank all of you, Minister Beitan, Parliament members, Yulia Marinovsky, and Mr. Dayani. It's just a very short sentence. I also want to thank you, and I think we need to adopt Rav Kook's concept. The new will be old, and the sacred will become part of the new. Thank you, all the participants, and thank you, Moshe Raz, representative of the parties that one should say you invested a lot, you prepared, and you sent us questions. Even the parties didn't have prepared platforms on this topic. So you're calling, and Sal Beitan, Minister Beitan, you mentioned different organizations investing efforts and monies and donations into this topic. Go on, promote that, develop that, work on that, do that in a more organized manner. And the state of Israel should take upon itself responsibility for this Jewish minority and become a center of the connection, to deepen the connection with the diaspora in an institutionalized manner. There's so many different organizations that are working on that. Reut and Ruderman Foundation, Miut Coalition includes so many people that do care for this topic, and they're very much engaged in it, and all of them non-institutionalized. So your parties, it's your decisions, shaping policies. Take this evening on this topic that I know is burning in your hearts, and just bring it into the discourse. And I think that this is the way to convey to the public of Israel and to remove this aloofness they experience. And those of you who refuse to come, those of you who agreed to come, all of you, for your different reasons, we will not discuss the reasons. Some of them stood us up, really. And it's important to remind them how important their position is in this very important discourse of values, of the connection of the Jewish people. The very fact that they kept silent is already an expression of a position, and it's quite a shame. Thank you, all of you, for this evening. Thank you, Nurit, and thank you. It was an honor to participate in this evening, Iran. Yeah, just a word to wrap it up, really. My name is Iran. I'm the CEO of Reut Group. As Nama just said, 2.5 years ago, we initiated the creation of the Minority Coalition, hundreds of social leaders in Israel from various backgrounds, work in order to bring closer the Jewish world outside of Israel to the Israeli society. Recently, I think we managed to lay out the foundation that within a few years will completely change the communication of Israeli society with the Jewish world and the way we perceive the Jewish world in Israel. We can create a revolution. I'm so sorry, my friends of politicians. I think the coalition we created from many different points is much more successful than the coalition of the recent years in the parliament. But it's also clear to us that the main objective that we have, and also indication of the success of our work, is actually embedded in our ability to create a political capital with a connection to the Jewish world, to make the Jewish world into the topic that the politicians in Israel see as one that actually can bring benefits in the voting stations. We're still not there, that it actually can become an incentive for you. I think it's an important event. Political parties that represent the whole plethora of political opinions in Israel. This event took place a few days before the election. It's unprecedented. The connection with the diaspora is included the political platform, majority of parties, or at least significant part of them. The depth and understanding of this issue is unprecedented. I am very optimistic. I would like to thank the parliament members that participated. Merav Ben-Ari, Rabbi Gilad Khalid, Michael Beton, Dani Dayan, Yulia Malinovsky, Uzi Dayan, and Moshe Raz. Thank you, the political aides, for your patience, those who asked questions. And a special thank you to Nurit Kaneti that mediated this evening. And as been mentioned, the podcast, wonderful podcast, yourself and Zvika Klein. It's one of the best and most vibrant channels of communication for the topics we discussed. And thank you of those of you who just visited us on Facebook. Dearest Ruderman family and share that is here with us. Leonel Alengevich, Ruderman Foundation, they have definite, they are stakeholders in the changes of our society and the relationship with the jury of the United States. Your partnership with you is a pride for us. Special thank you to Yoni Alon for the support that is much more than just technical. Your professionality and your positivity and your patience made it so pleasant. I would like to thank the parliament members and the coalition members relentlessly working for the promotion of our mission and the mission task that's called the promotion of them. A minority promotion in order to make sure that the connection with the diaspora will on the agenda. We gather only before the elections, so the members do not sleep for 2 hours at least. So great thank you to those who facilitate to promote the communication with the Jewish world while participating and supporting, first of all, Rodan and Amnon that are part of this event. We owe you a debt of thank you that unfortunately the setting do not allow, and Toronto Federation and the federation that supported us during this year. And obviously, thank you to the founder of Reut, Gita Greenstein, for your multi-layer support and long-term support. And thank you so much to my colleagues from Reut Institute, CEO Nama Klein and Davital that worked so hard not to prepare this event during this whole year. You're the living spirit, not just behind this event and not just behind this coalition, but behind the great changes that are preserving Israeli society as a democratic one. Thank you so much. We adjourned. Chag Sameach.